Okay, we're here to talk photography pre-production and the things that you need to think about when you are putting your SAT folio together in regards to your photographs and planning to shoot your photographs. So first of all, I'm going to discuss a number of things that you need to consider, and then I'm going to talk mock-ups and what mock-ups should look like and how to plan them and how to set them out. First thing that you need to consider is your method of exhibition. How will your photographs be seen, or theoretically how would your photographs be seen? If you've discussed your audience and you've discussed that this is the type of person that would consume photography in an art gallery and you're going for a more artistic style of photography, but then that would be something that you would need to consider. Where would your photos be displayed? If you look at that first photo there, that's someone consuming photography through Instagram, and to be honest, that is the majority of consumption of photography nowadays, and most likely the way that you yourself consume photography. So consider that. If you are producing photography to be consumed by a younger audience, it's most likely going to be consumed through Instagram. So there's no reason why that could not be your method of exhibition. If it is, when you actually exhibit your photographs, are you going to produce them digitally? Are you going to display them digitally? How are you going to do that? Having said that, when you hand your work in, even if you've planned in your folio and you've suggested that it would be consumed digitally, you may still print it out, and you may still mount it to foam core if that's what you choose to do. But this is certainly something that you need to think about. Where will your photos be displayed? Will they be displayed online, at an art gallery, in a book maybe? Something to think about. How will your photos be displayed? When they're put up on the wall, if that's how they're going to be displayed, is there a sequence to them? Is there an order? Is that order going to be just a straightforward grid, or is there some other kind of way that they need to be presented on the wall to be read in a certain way? Does it matter? Is there a sequence to them at all? This is something that you need to think about. And if there is a sequence, then in your folio you should demonstrate what that sequence looks like. And you need to explain why. Why are you doing all this? You can see in that third photo there too that there's different sizes of photos. It's from the same sequence, the same series of photographs, but some are small and some are large. Not all of your photos have to be the same size, but if you're going to do that, you have to explain why, and most of the time that explanation is going to involve how an audience reads and engages with that photography. You also need to consider framing, mounting, printing, whether you're doing it digitally, and like I said before, you have to explain why. I'm going to talk a bit more about what the options are in a minute, but you need to have demonstrated that you've considered why this is. Most of the time that's going to revolve around who your audience is and how that person's going to consume photography. Like I said, if they're young, they're most likely consuming it digitally, online, through Instagram, through social media. If they are older, more mature, maybe middle-aged, then they're more likely to go to an art gallery or maybe consume it in a book. And how will this exhibition affect engagement? If they are consuming it online in social media, that just swiping with your finger is a really kind of important thing to consider if you want your photos to be instantly engaging, because most of the time people, when they're flipping through Instagram, they don't stop for very long. And if they do, it's because something has grabbed their attention. So that's definitely something that you should consider. How would the exhibition affect narrative? If, like I said before, the way that they're displayed on the wall, whether they're in a book, whether they're in a sequence, all of these things affect how they'll be read, if there is a sequence to them or not. You need to consider aspect ratio and how you're going to crop your photos, or if you're going to crop your photos at all. Now, what tends to happen is students will produce their photography and they'll go and they'll print it out to A4 paper or A3 paper or A2 paper, because that's what the printing options are. But they haven't thought about how that affects the aspect ratio of their photography. And certainly this is something that you need to think about. So these images here are taken from this website. I'll have shared this slideshow with you, so you'll be able to click on that and go to that particular website. But these are just 4 specified, traditionally used aspect ratios for photography. The first one there is the traditional one. It's 3:2, which means that the width is 3 parts, whereas the height is 2 parts. So if the width was 30 centimeters long, the height would be 20 centimeters. And that one is traditionally used because back in the days of shooting on film, that was kind of the standard size. If you look at the next one, 4:3, it's more likely what you're going to see on a screen. The next one along is the square one, which you see on Instagram most of the time. But however, Instagram does allow you to produce photography which is rectangular, and that's the aspect ratio that is used through social media. The one down the end there is the 16:9, so that's a cinema screen or your big screen TV at home. That would be that aspect ratio, and you can see that looks much more dramatic, much more cinematic, and we're seeing big wide open spaces. Compositionally, the same rules apply, but there are differences, and this is certainly what you want to think about in terms of the type of photography that you're producing and how it's being displayed. You really need to think about aspect ratio. You need to consider that in your folio. And if you are sticking to a particular aspect ratio, that's not necessarily the aspect ratio that the camera is going to produce. So you need to learn how to crop to that aspect ratio when you are editing your photos. Orientation is also huge. Don't just kind of, point the camera and press the button. So if you're shooting with the DSLR, you're going to have that camera on the tripod, and you're going to get the one on the right, which is the horizontal landscape mode. Whereas if you're shooting portraiture, most of the time the vertical mode is actually called portrait mode, because most of the time it's used for portraits, and it's done so because people are tall and high rather than flat and horizontal. The reason why horizontal mode is called landscape is because that's the mode that you're going to use if you're shooting a landscape, because you want to choose a wide open area and you want to be able to see a wide open area. So the orientation needs to be considered depending on what you're taking photos of. If you're shooting square photos, doesn't matter. Again, these here are links to websites which will give you a bit more information about that. But I seriously suggest that you consider this. You don't need to have all of your photos the same orientation. You don't have to have all your photos the same aspect ratio, but they work better as a series if they do. You want some aesthetic similarities between them. But this is certainly something that you need to consider, and you need to explain why. Size. What are your constraints and limitations? Obviously, you're not going to be able to produce a photo like that, which fills up an entire wall. Well, you're not going to be able to do it at school, but there are other ways that you can do that. And the ARC has an A1 size printer, so a poster size printer. And if you went in and spoke to them, they would most likely let you use that. Most students produce A4 or A3 sized photographs because the laser printer that you're most likely going to be using only has those sizes. That doesn't mean that you need to stick to that. Do they need to be that big? Can they be smaller than that? Can they be A5, which is half an A4? Could they be the size of regular photos? This is certainly something that you need to consider. And again, you need to explain why. Why do you want something to be really, really big? Why do you want something to be really, really small? How is it going to look? How is it going to affect audience engagement and consumption? Lighting. Lighting is photography, and photography is lighting. Photography is the art of capturing light. If you didn't have light, you wouldn't get photography. So if you haven't considered lighting, your photos are seriously going to suffer. These are the lights that make up a traditional 3-point lighting technique. We've got a key light, we've got a fill light, and we've got a backlight. Are you going to use all three of those lights? Are you going to use one? Are you going to use two? If you're only going to use one or two, which ones are you going to use? You need to know what each one of these means, and you need to know what each one of these does, so you can best shoot your photography. If you don't know these things, then you should be researching them. If you haven't already done so in your production experiments, then take a light home over the weekend and muck around with it, because lighting is photography. If you don't consider lighting, then your photographs are not going to be photographs. They're going to be just plain old photos. We have reflectors and diffusers at school that you are welcome to use. These are things that, well, reflectors are best used if you're shooting outside in sunshine. Then you want to use a reflector, because outside in sunshine, a light's not going to do very much, but a reflector certainly will reflect sunlight onto your subject. So if you are shooting out in the sunshine, you have control over that light. Diffusers diffuse the light, they spread the light out. So if you don't want the light to be just on a specific spot on your subject, then you might want to consider a diffuser. Again, these are things that you can practice and experiment with. Take them home on the weekend, see what they do. You should think about light masking. So directing the light, controlling the light. The LED light panels that we have at school basically just spill light everywhere all over the subject. You might want to be able to focus that light, to funnel that light so it hits certain points on your subject and doesn't just fill the entire space with light. We have something called black wrap, which is kind of like a black tin foil that you can wrap around the light to be able to funnel it. We have other panels, reflective panels that wrap around the LEDs that you can use to control the light. So this is something that you should be aware of and something that you should play around with. Filters. We don't have filters for the lights, but you can get some cellophane wrapping paper from the supermarket and chuck it over the light if you want to change the color of the light. It's something that you should think about. Practical lighting. Practical lighting is where the light that is in the photograph is the source of the light. So if you were taking a photo of someone and they were sitting next to a lamp, then that lamp would be the practical light. It would both be part of the photograph and it would light the photograph. Natural lighting needs to be fully considered. So if you're planning on using natural lighting, if you are relying on the sun to light your photographs, then you need to fully consider the weather and the time of day that you are shooting. You are going to be shooting most likely in the middle of winter, when sunlight is scarce and you get lots of overcast days, which are not great to shoot photographs with. So if you are shooting outside, then you should be planning a number of days to shoot your photographs, not just one, because most likely the day that you go to shoot your photographs, the sun's not going to do what you want it to. You also, like I said before, reflectors are going to be something that you can use to control the light. You also need to know what time of the day you're going to shoot in, because the sun is going to be at a certain point in the sky, and that's going to affect what your photo looks like. Lighting must be considered and must be planned. These are lighting diagrams, and each one of your mock-ups needs to have a lighting diagram. Even if you're just using the sun, you should be drawing a diagram to show where the sunlight is going to be coming from. The one on the right is made with an app and a website called SciLights, and you can see the web address down there on the bottom corner. So you can access that. It's got all the little components that you need to put together to show how your lighting is going to work and how you're going to set it up. The one in the middle was done by a student who's put a lot of thought and effort into how his lighting is going to be set up. But it could be as simple as something on the left-hand side where all you got is a camera, a light, and a reflector, and that's the lighting diagram. But you need to demonstrate how the lighting is going to be set up. You can draw these by hand if you need to. There's the link to the Silights website. Lenses, you need to know what we have available. We don't have a lot, but we do have a number which can really affect the look of your photograph, and you need to know what the difference each one makes. If you've never changed lenses on a camera before, come in, see what we've got, take them home, play around with them, see what the difference is. We have got a fat $1,300 portraiture lens in there that you are welcome to use, and if you are taking photos of people, I highly recommend that you take that. The lenses that come with the cameras are not great, so if you're just planning on using the lens that comes with the DSLR, don't expect a lot from it. You really need to understand the different lenses that we have and what they do. Editing your photographs, you should be shooting in RAW and editing in Lightroom. If you don't know what that means, then you need to find out. RAW photography is a format of photograph that has a lot more information in it, so it gives you a lot more freedom when you edit, and you generally edit RAW photographs in Lightroom. So if this is not making sense to you, you've got a bit of research to do. You shouldn't just be shooting photographs in the JPEG standard, because you're limiting the amount of control that you have over your photography. Professional photographers all shoot in RAW and edit in Lightroom. That's a fact. So that's something that you should be doing. Photoshop should only be used when necessary. Photoshop is not a way, I mean, you can do just the standard pure editing of your photographs in Lightroom. That's fine, but that's not what the software is made for. The software is made to manipulate photos and to cut parts out and stick different parts together, remove things, rearrange things. It's not for pure editing. Lightroom is for pure editing. So you should only be using Photoshop if you are doing some kind of digital manipulation to your photos. And if you are planning on using Photoshop, you need to, in your folio, demonstrate how you plan to use it and outline exactly what you plan to do. Same thing goes for Lightroom. This last one is super important. You need to know this stuff before production. So all of this should be going to your folio. If you don't know how to use Lightroom, then you need to spend a few hours learning how to use it, and I can give you the resources to do that. But you need to download it, you need to go out, you need to shoot some photos in RAW, you need to edit them, you need to see what this software can do, because you need to outline exactly what you plan to do with it. So I've kind of discussed printing and mounting when I was talking about display, how your photographs are going to be displayed. Know what your options are. The main options, or the main choices that people make, besides digital, if you're planning on printing your photographs to hard copy, we have inkjet printers in the Mac Lab, which are the best quality printer, and they are photographic printers. So of all the printers in the school, they're the best ones to use. They print to A4 and A3, and we generally have just a standard matte type of paper and a standard gloss type of paper. You get to choose which ones you want to use. They're the main options. You can print to the photocopiers in the school to a low standard if that's what you choose to do. But most people are going to choose to use the inkjet printers. You need to have full control over the printing process. If you want to print bigger than A3 and you find someone that has a printer that can do that, such as the Arc, then you need to have full control over that printing process. You should be the one pressing the print button. You should be the one controlling the settings on the printer, and that's something that you need to learn how to do. You can't just rock up into Officeworks and expect them to do it for you. You need to have full control over the printing process. I've discussed different paper stock, but there's more than just gloss and matte. There is gloss and matte. You need to think about the sizes that are available. Weight, when we're talking about paper weight, we're talking about the thickness of the paper, the density of the paper. Consider the kind of paper that's used to make a newspaper. Compare that with the cover of a magazine, and you can tell, just thinking about that, different papers have different thicknesses and different weight, and that can affect the quality of your photograph. So that's something that you need to consider. The texture of the paper, it could be a rough kind of crafty paper. It could be one where you can see the fibers in the paper. Some people have printed before on acrylic, see-through plastic. There's different ways to do that, but again, it's kind of dependent on your narrative and why you're doing what you're doing. You can print on different colored paper if that has any effect on your photography. Mounting your photos, you can put them in frames if you want. I recommend not doing that because it can get really expensive. If you have 10 photographs and you're buying cheap $20 frames, that's $200 right there. You can pick them up from op shops if that's what you want to do, but you run into the problem of not being able to get a particular standard of size for the frames that you want to use. My recommendation is just mounting to foam core. There are different thicknesses of foam core. You can get white foam core, you can get black foam core. Photographs mounted to foam core generally look pretty good. They look pretty professional. They look good when they're mounted up on a wall, displayed on a wall. You need to know how to adhere the photographs to the foam core, and you need to know how to trim the foam core so that it looks nice and neat and not rough. Some other things to consider. Composition, which is if you've chosen to do photography for your SAT, I would expect you to understand different methods of composing your photo. This photo here uses the rule of thirds, and I would expect you to know what that is. Cropping, this photo has been very tightly cropped. Do you want it to be tightly cropped? Do you want it to be cropped from far away? How much of the space do you want the subject to take up, and why? Framing, so using frames, using natural frames, using man-made frames, placing your subject in a frame or in some kind of a shape, rather than just having them kind of out in the open. Depth of field, this photo uses a shallow depth of field, and you can see there that really works to control where your eye lands when you look at the photograph. The use of color, or the use of black and white. Do you want the color to be saturated? Do you want the color to be desaturated? If you're using black and white, why are you using black and white? Color contrast, such as this photo uses a red-green color contrast, which really makes the colors pop because they are kind of opposite each other on the color spectrum. Contrast of light and dark can make for a really striking photo. Contrast, I think, is super important, and certainly when you're editing your photos, contrast is certainly the first thing that you should adjust, because it can really make the details in a photo stand out. And when you're lighting your photo, you might want to light for a high contrast. So you can see in this image has really black blacks and really white whites. And so you can see lots of detail in this photo, and it looks very striking. The use of a vignette, which is in this photograph, the edges of the photograph are darker, so it creates this frame. It looks like light has been adjusted to the middle of the photo, and you can see it kind of funnels your vision. It draws you into the center of the photograph. Vignettes can be used really, really effectively, and vignettes don't have to be too dark. They don't have to draw too much attention themselves to be effective.